Imagine waking up one day to find that the mirror in your bathroom does not reflect your face, but your decisions. Each smile, apology, promise, and silence rendered like fingerprints on cold glass. You reach out expecting smooth certainty, but the surface is wet with question marks. You think you've been honest, kind, hardworking. You think your beliefs have weight because you carried them through storms. And yet, behind the mirror, a dim room flickers to life. There's a jury you didn't summon, and they're speaking in your own voice. Who taught you your virtues? Who benefits from your conscience? When did you mistake habit for destiny? The mirror fogs with your breath, and in that fog are the outlines of words you've always felt but never dared to read. You may be acting out a script you didn't write. It isn't a conspiracy, not the grotesque sort with shadowy men in hats. It's subtler, more intimate, a conspiracy between your instincts and your ideals. You are convinced you love the good because the good is good. But what if you love it because it grants you leverage over your fear? You think you hate cruelty because cruelty is ugly, but what if you hate it because it reminds you of something untamed within you? Someone, some force, has been editing your motives in the margins, and the annotations look suspiciously like your handwriting. You call it morality, you call it truth, you call it you. Now imagine Nietzsche standing in the doorway behind that mirror, not as a professor with chalk in his hand, but as a diagnostician with a stethoscope pressed to the heart of your convictions. He isn't asking if your beliefs are correct. He's asking what they are doing. He doesn't ask what you think. He asks what kind of person you must be in order to need to think it. And with that shift, the floorboards of certainty groan. What if your beliefs are less like windows onto reality and more like stained glass, colored by the light you require, strengthened by the social scaffolding that holds the cathedral together? The sun might be the same, but the colors you see depend on where you kneel. Consider the paradox you've been living without noticing. You insist on authenticity, but your authentic self was assembled from borrowed tones, your mother's caution, your father's hunger, your culture's idea of strength. You worship honesty, but you hide your most ambitious desires behind euphemisms like duty and humility. You resent the arrogance of others. Yet your resentment is itself a kind of concealed arrogance, a conviction that your pain grants you moral superiority. Which is more dangerous? Open ambition that knows it is ambition, or virtue that secretly wants the crown? Which is more honest, confessing your desire to dominate, or pretending your refusal to dominate isn't another form of control? And if truth sometimes destroys the delicate illusions that keep you alive, must you choose between being honest and being whole? There is a heavier question breathing in the room, one that doesn't knock because it has a key to your bloodstream. If your values are strategies disguised as principles, if your kindness is a weapon you wield against your own aggression, if your faith in reason is the last fortress protecting the frightened child inside, then who are you really? Are you the mask or the face? Are you the river or its banks? If your most principled refusals, the times you said no to power, to pleasure, to revenge, were a subtler form of power-seeking, what would it mean to admit it? Would you collapse into nihilism, or would a new kind of honesty become possible? One that doesn't apologize for strength or dress weakness in silk. You stand at the sink and listen. Somewhere, two neighbors are arguing about politics, sure that righteousness is a compass rather than a weather vane. Somewhere, a friend posts another moral declaration, crafted like a shield and a spear in one. Somewhere, a leader appeals to the people while counting on the sleepiness of crowds. And in each, if you look closely, you can see the choreography of hidden motives. The relief of belonging masquerading as conviction, the sweetness of superiority disguised as compassion, the fear of insignificance wearing the mask of justice. You've moved through these rooms all your life without naming the smell. Nietzsche would call it a scent of the herd, the perfume of safety, the incense of resentment. And he would ask, not cruelly but surgically, what do you gain by believing what you believe? The disturbing part is not that you may be mistaken. It's that your mistakes are necessary. Life does not tolerate the naked wind of truth for long. We build shelters of meaning to keep from freezing. But some shelters grow into prisons. Some virtues become excuses. Some ideals, especially the ones you love most, were invented to anesthetize a wound that you refuse to see. If that's true, then the task is terrifying. You must become an archaeologist of your own motives, knowing that the ruins you uncover might be temples you once prayed in. Can you set the altar on fire and still love what remains? Can you meet your ambition in daylight and not despise it? Can you admit that your heart wants to bend the world without apologizing for the verb to bend? The great question presses its forehead against yours. If your highest values are not eternal stars but living organisms, growing, infected, adapting, will you take responsibility for them? Or will you cling to the fiction that they descended from the sky complete? Will you dare to ask what your goodness can? Who pays for your purity? What appetite your humility keeps on a leash? And if you discover that you are not merely a spectator of your impulses, but their arena, will you still cling to innocence? Or will you learn a sterner kind of love for yourself? Hold this tension. Do not resolve it. Let the mirror stay fogged, the jury murmuring, the diagnostician patient, because the scandal hasn't even been named yet. Before you decide who you are, you must confront what is steering you when you aren't looking. If you're ready, we'll trace the hidden machinery, the psychological and philosophical roots of this quiet conspiracy, so that the mirror can finally show a face that knows it was made and chooses, still, to be made again. The hidden problem and its psychological, philosophical roots. Step closer to that fogged mirror. The door in the glass opens onto a workshop, not a cathedral. Anvils, hammers, masks half-formed and cooling on hooks. In this room, values are forged, polished, and renamed. Nietzsche stands not as a moralist, but as a genealogist, tracking the bloodlines of your convictions. What he knew and what you sense without naming is that your ought first served a need. The usefulness of a belief arrived before its nobility, and then nobility was fabricated to protect the usefulness. This is the hidden problem. You imagine your values are discoveries, but often they are inventions that have forgotten they were invented. Nietzsche's diagnosis begins with ressentiment, the slow alchemy by which powerlessness creates a new currency. Once, good meant noble, vigorous, life-affirming. It sang of health and command. Then resentment learned a trick: invert the meanings. Good becomes the meek, the obedient, the non-threatening. Also becomes the strong, the creative, the unashamedly alive. It isn't that gentleness or humility are false. It's that in the genealogy of morals, they were weaponized to tame more assertive forces. You've seen this in miniature. When an unadmitted envy attacks excellence in the name of fairness, when refusal to act claims the title of principle, when fatigue calls itself compassion to avoid the risk of passion. The alchemy continues inside you. To domesticate your instincts, culture sells you a bond you cannot repay. Debt and guilt are siblings in German, Schuld, and the bookkeeping runs in your marrow. The bad conscience, Nietzsche says, is the feral animal turned against itself when it cannot hunt outward. Your unspent energies pace the cage, scratching marks called guilt. You feel noble as you punish yourself, as if pain were proof of goodness. But who profits from you turning the knife inward? Who benefits when your vigor becomes self-surveillance? A priestly voice, sometimes wearing your own face, uses your thirst for purity to make you manageable. When you mistake internalized aggression for morality, you confuse obedience with virtue, surrender with transcendence. Jung picks up the thread where Nietzsche's scalpel leaves off. He calls it the shadow, the stockroom of your disowned traits. You curate a persona to make society comfortable. Helpful, patient, principled. The rest, the ambition, lust, rage, hunger for recognition, gets pushed into the cellar unlabeled. But what is banished returns as projection. You despise in others the impulses you refuse to touch in yourself. Your condemnation glows with an odd intimacy. It knows too much. Far from purifying you, repression breeds contamination. The good grows scented with disinfectant. You begin to suspect that your most pristine moral stances conceal the very drives they denounce. Schopenhauer called it the will, a blind, aimless striving that possesses creatures and throws them into a world of endless wanting. Nietzsche disagreed with its aimlessness, but kept the root diagnosis of a subterranean drive. He renamed it the will to power, not merely domination of others, but expansion, interpretation, intensification. Life in this vision is not content with survival. It seeks to express, to shape, to overcome. If the will to power is the current beneath the surface, then ideas and ideals are sails and rudders. You don't think first and then desire. You desire and then arrange your thoughts into a fleet that seems destined to arrive where you were already going. Contemporary psychology nods in reluctant agreement. Consider moral dumbfounding. You feel that something is wrong and only afterward construct reasons. Or confabulation. Split-brain patients invent explanations with perfect sincerity, as if the mind were a press secretary for motives it doesn't control. Predictive processing casts the brain as a prediction engine. It samples reality through the filter of expectations and updates only reluctantly. The default mode network stitches a narrative self from fragments, smoothing contradictions so that you recognize your life each morning. Confirmation bias, motivated reasoning, self-serving bias, names for the same trick. You feel the conclusion first, then arrange the premises like furniture around it. Is this hypocrisy? Or simply the architecture of a mind that evolved to keep its story coherent enough to act? Sartre warned about bad faith. You pretend you are a fixed essence. I'm just not the kind of person who, to escape the nausea of freedom. You bury your possibility in a role the way an actor sleeps in costume because the stage lights are cold when they're off. You become the dutiful child, the righteous critic, the humble caregiver, the principled skeptic, not as a living choice, but as a refuge from choosing. Then the role colonizes your conscience. The mask insists it is your skin. Your freedom doesn't vanish. Freedom never vanishes. But you conspire to forget it until regret reminds you with its teeth. Meanwhile, Huxley's prophecy arrives not in jackboots, but in pillows. Anesthetic pleasures whisper that truth is a luxury, discomfort unnecessary. Comfort becomes a worldview. Algorithms curate a continuous lullaby of congruent opinions and irresistible indignations. Outrage is spoon-fed in microdoses, each swallow tasting like meaning, each share feeling like action. This is how the will to power hides in pacification. You dominate not by force, but by absorption. You dissolve your dissonance in endless scroll, your unease in frictionless convenience. The result isn't a jackhammer. It's a velvet beak in which nothing hurts enough to move you, and everything stings just enough to keep you clicking. Terror management theory adds a colder undertone. The awareness of death is a pressure system your psyche must regulate. When mortality hums in the background, you grip cultural worldviews like oxygen masks. You defend them not because they are true, but because they promise symbolic permanence. Attack my belief, and you threaten my afterlife of reputation, my tribe's inscription on the wall of time. So your morality becomes a shield against extinction anxiety. Your conviction grows louder when the night is close. Is your insistence on absolute values a love of truth, or is it a hand over your mouth against the scream? Frankl would not disagree about the vacuum, but he would argue for your capacity to create meaning in the ruins. Yet even meaning can be counterfeited. When you lack purpose, substitutes arrive. Performance, busyness, purity spirals, ideological crusades that feel like direction while requiring no encounter with your private desert. He who has a why to live, Frankl echoes Nietzsche, can bear almost anyhow. But a borrowed why breaks under weight. You keep lifting, calling the pain noble, and the fracture spreads. Society doesn't simply reflect these dynamics, it engineers them. Reputation is a hard currency, language is a market. You learn quickly which phrases buy approval and which taboos trigger exile. The social brain, calibrated by evolution to track status and reciprocity, detects the cost of dissent and steers you toward conformity dressed as conviction. Ash lines on a card become policies in a boardroom. Milgram's lab coat becomes a credential on a profile. You calibrate your conscience to the crowd and call it wisdom. The herd is not foolish, it is safe. But the price of safety is often the internalization of a voice that says, we, so loudly, you forget how to say I without apology. Here then, is the clandestine machinery, a basal will seeking intensity, a mask you grow to survive contact, a shadow swelling in proportion to what you refuse, a culture supplying roles, anesthetics, and ready-made meanings, a brain rigged for coherence over accuracy, an existential pressure that inflates your values into talismans. None of this makes morality impossible. It makes unexamined morality dangerous. It makes goodness an instrument you might play to keep your darker music off stage while its vibrations dictate the rhythm anyway. You can feel the tension now, like a storm condensing behind your ribs. If your ideals are historically negotiated strategies, if your conscience is a converted predator, if your musts are often your wants wearing robes, then the problem is not simply that you are deceived. The problem is that you are deceived in ways that work so well, they became indistinguishable from you. When you ask, "Who am I?" the workshop responds with 1,000 tools that all answer mine. Hold your breath one moment longer. The next step is not confession, but consequence. What happens to your choices, your loves, your politics, your creativity, when this machinery runs without your knowledge? How does it shape the streets you walk, the rooms you enter, the history you inherit? The mirror is about to show you not just the workshop, but the city it built around you, the unseen consequences. Step through the mirror and into the city your unseen machinery has built. The streets are clean because doubt has been swept under the curb. On the corner stands a monument to good intentions, burnished by hands that needed to believe in their innocence. Banners flutter down the avenues, comfort, safety, consensus, each one stitched from 1,000 small surrenders. You recognize the architecture. It's not authoritarian, it's ergonomic. The benches are designed for your compliance. The lighting flatters your fear. Even the air tastes like permission. You begin the day by consulting the oracle in your palm. The feed offers outrage pre-seasoned and hope in disposable servings. A headline tugs your amygdala. The variable reward schedule drips dopamine like a leaky faucet. Your prefrontal cortex rationalizes your vigilance. I need to stay informed, while your body contracts into a crouch that never fully uncoils. The brain's predictive machinery is satisfied. The world remains just dangerous enough to justify your scrolling, just redeemable enough to justify your posting. You haven't acted, you've adjusted your internal weather. But in the statistics of the soul, mood often masquerades as morality. At work, the consequences grow subtler. You sit in a room where ideas need permission slips. You have a bold thought, an architecture that could change the blueprint, but the silent math of reputation activates. Loss aversion, status quo bias, an internal ash experiment in which the majority opinion lives in your spine. You edit your thought into something palatable, an improvement rather than a challenge. Everyone nods. You leave the meeting praised for your teamwork, while the animal in you, the one Nietzsche hoped you would not tranquilize, paces in your chest, underfed. The city rewards you with a coffee voucher. This is how creativity dies, not by censorship, but by the warmth of reasonable applause. In love, the consequences are tender and tyrannical. You tell your partner you value honesty, you even mean it. But when they mirror your shadow, when they ask why you keep rehearsal versions of yourself ready for different audiences, you call it unfair or overly critical. Moral language arrives like incense to sanctify your discomfort. You apologize for raising your voice, but not for the manipulation your gentleness performs. You avoid the question of your hunger by feeding them reassurance. They feel held and starved at once, and you both sleep beside a cultivation of small betrayals. The city calls it maturity. Sometimes maturity is merely the ratification of fear. In politics, the unseen force scales up into spectacle. Raisonnement becomes a broadcast. Leaders learn to mint moral currencies that buy loyalty with indignation. Words like justice and freedom are tenderized into slogans that leave no bruise when thrown. You're invited to join a swarm, finally a place for the pressure of your mortality to exhale. Group polarization hums, like minds drift into sharper versions of themselves, fed by algorithms that salivate at certainty. You feel moral, but your morality has become a coordinate in someone else's strategy. Nietzsche's ascetic priest appears in modern garb, pundits, influencers, grievance entrepreneurs, transmuting vitality into guilt and then selling absolution as content. You do not need a dictator when you have perfectly aimless outrage. Culture at large becomes a theater where roles are pre-assigned. The market co-opts everything, including rebellion. Disruption is a brand. Authenticity has a skew. You can buy a t-shirt that announces your non-conformity in 7 sizes, pre-shrunk. The ascetic ideal returns as wellness, a war on appetite disguised as spiritual refinement. You optimize hydration, sleep, and steps. Your rings close, your rest heart rate drops, your soul remains unvisited. Nietzsche's last man blinks and says, "We invented happiness." And your wearable chirps its agreement. The will to power does not vanish. It burrows into metrics. You dominate numbers because facing your unlived life would require an older form of courage. Education, too, quietly trains the hand that holds the mask. Children learn what earns praise faster than they learn what they love. Rubrics replace risk. Correctness becomes the narrow runway on which their minds land each thought. Curiosity is domesticated into achievement, erudition into resume ornament. By the time they speak in public, they speak in the accent of what is safe to approve. The city awards scholarships to its own future architects. Meanwhile, your nervous system keeps the minutes. Chronic micro-concessions accumulate like lactic acid. When you repress aggression, it doesn't evaporate. It reroutes. You experience it as fatigue and a delicate contempt. Bad conscience eats your vigor, and your body interprets sustained, unresolved stress as a world with no open doors. Learned helplessness grows, so softly that it feels like personality. You joke about burnout while designing your days to perpetuate the burn. The caffeine, the couch, the doom scroll, the late-night rationalization that tomorrow will be your beginning. Here, the cognitive biases aren't mere quirks. They are construction workers. The availability heuristic ensures that the dramas you can recall feel like the entire horizon. You vote, parent, and spend according to what is feasible, not what is real. The fundamental attribution error lets you convert your adversary's complexity into a caricature while treating your own failures as weather. Moral licensing whispers that your donation buys you indulgence, that your public stance pays off your private cowardice. Confirmation bias and motivated reasoning lock arms to ensure you never face the vertigo of being wrong about the thing on which you've built your worth. The default mode network obligingly stitches these selective perceptions into a narrative that feels like continuity. You are not lying, you are editing. But the edits become your life. The institutions you inhabit echo your inner compromise. Bureaucracies crystallize self-protective incentives. Procedures replace judgment. Accountability morphs into the theatrics of compliance. Injustice is laundered through the grammar of policy. Outgroups are constructed to relieve the majority's bad conscience. A rotating scapegoat offers the catharsis of unity without the cost of introspection. Nietzsche warned that without a living source of value, societies invest in idols that demand sacrifice while promising none of the gods' terror or generosity. We are efficient, tolerant, and quietly merciless. Art senses what prose cannot say and communicates the malaise in negative space. You watch films that are technically perfect and spiritually anemic. You listen to songs that confess pain with craft but lack the embarrassment of risk. You feel seen and remain intact. Great art wants your defenses to fail for an hour. The city wants you to applaud without sweating. You become a curator of experiences rather than a participant in them. You buy tickets to catharsis and keep your hands clean. And then, a personal cost you didn't price in. Intimacy with yourself narrows. When values become armor instead of adventure, you stop surprising you. You know every argument you'll make before you make it. Your desires dress in a modesty that flatters more than it reveals. You master your reputation and misplace your life. The result is a grief without funeral. No corpse, no service, just a persistent sense that someone important did not show up and will not be coming. This is the trap. Not a cage with bars, but a nursery with soft walls. Not a tyrant, but a lullaby. You are safer and smaller, kinder on paper, and crueler in the rooms where your unlived energy begs for a task and finds none but self-punishment. The herd protects you from wolves and from your own teeth, and in the quiet, your will's howl echoes as pathology. If you listen too closely, you might have to move. The city is efficient at teaching you to mistake motion for change. Promotions, posts, pilgrimages, practices. Yet beneath the choreography, the operative principle remains. Avoid the risks that might reconfigure you. Nietzsche's question sharpens. If the hidden machinery is working this well, if it can build streets you love to walk while leading you nowhere, what would constitute a genuine act of rebellion? What would it cost to stop being so successful at your own domestication? Pause here at the crosswalk. The signal says wait, and the herd obeys. You look down at the painted lines and imagine they were laid by a previous version of you who didn't know any other way to feel safe. Cars pass, the wind smells like possibility and exhaust. Somewhere an old instinct taps the glass from the inside. The rebellion, how to break free. Step off the curb before the signal changes, not recklessly, but with the calm suspicion that the rules were written for a different kind of creature than you intend to be. Rebellion is not a tantrum, it's a reallocation of allegiance. You have been loyal to comfort, to consensus, to the numbness that goes by balance. Now you are to be loyal to the living center that wants to expand, to interpret, to make. Nietzsche's rebellion is not against morality as such, but against morality that has forgotten it was crafted by living hands. Your task is not to become immoral, but to become a maker of morals. Beginning with your own. There is a map for this revolt hidden in a parable. The three metamorphoses of the spirit. First, the camel. You kneel and take on weight, learning the strength to carry. Not the weight of other people's thou shalt, but chosen burdens that test your structure. Voluntary hardship is not self-harm, it's proof of capacity. Select challenges that demand sincerity, a dawn practice you cannot fake, a craft that resists shortcuts, a conversation that risks being known. You carry to know what you can carry. Then the lion. You confront the dragon whose scales sparkle with thou shalt. On each scale, an inherited imperative glitters. Be nice, stay small, don't embarrass us. Never fail, never offend, be reasonable. The lion's revolt is a roar that empties the room of borrowed approvals. You say, I will. You decline roles that once paid your rent in safety. You accept the misinterpretation, loss of status, the tremor in your limbs as you realize you've just forfeited your place in someone else's script. Finally, the child, not regression, but creation. Innocence returns not as ignorance, but as consent to play. You ask, what can I build now that I no longer measure myself against a dragon? You invent rules like a game designer, then test them not for purity, but for fertility. Do they generate energy, art, relationships, laughter, risk? The child's yes is sacred because it empowers a world rather than policing one. This metamorphic path isn't abstract. It asks for daily practices that feel indecently concrete. Genealogical journaling. Each morning write one value you hold, kindness, ambition, fairness, faith, and interrogate it like a detective. Who introduced it? What did it protect you from? Whom did it annoy? When did it betray you? How has it been used to avoid desire? What would it look like if it were braver? The point is not demolition, but ownership. You're not smashing stained glass, you're learning to cut and lead new windows. Shadow appointments. Set a weekly hour to meet a disowned part of you. Rage, competitiveness, sensuality, exhibitionism. Don't justify, don't confess, listen. Ask, where would you serve me if I gave you a job? Rage might guard your boundaries. Competitiveness might train your craft. Sensuality might restore color to your life's grayscale. Integration is not indulgence. It's task assignment for energies that will sabotage you if unemployed. Disobedience training. Choose one low-stakes norm each day to violate with elegance. Sit in the unchosen seat. Ask the unsanctioned question. Wear the unapproved color. Use the word your tribe avoids, not to antagonize, but to loosen the hurting instinct that froze your spine. Your nervous system must learn that social frostbite is survivable. Risk workmanship. Create something that can fail in public. A poem, a proposal, a prototype, an invitation. Publish with your name. Nietzsche's rebellion isn't nihilism, it's artistry. You don't prove freedom by refusing to build. You prove it by building under self-chosen constraints, then absorbing criticism without turning it into theology. True speech to one person. Once a week, tell one unflattering truth about yourself to someone who can hold it. Not the sanitized confession engineered for sympathy, the risky one that threatens your persona. You are training your tongue to carry your soul's weight. Digital vows, not abstinence but sovereignty. Decide when and why you enter the feed and keep your own word. Algorithms are not demons, they are mirrors. But no mirror deserves to be your morning and your night. Replace 1 hour of scrolling with 1 hour of deliberate reading, thinking, or walking. If your mind is a prediction engine, give it cleaner fuel. Amor fati drills. Once a day, rehearse love for a difficulty you did not choose. Not resignation, love. I want this too. Treat obstacles as invitations to intensify. The will to power doesn't dominate the world by force. It reinterprets the blows as percussion. When fate throws you a discord, your rebellion says, let's compose around it. The recurrence test. At night, ask of one decision, would I will this again, eternally? Not because the cosmos will loop, but because the question cuts through anesthesia. If the answer is no, trace the cowardice that produced it. Rebelling is sometimes gentle. You adjust by 1 degree, nightly, until your days are livable on infinite replay. Counterintuitive truth, you will need solitude, not loneliness, but the kind of isolation that makes the herd's voice faint enough for your own to come through. Nietzsche wrote for walkers, people whose thoughts learn from the rhythm of feet. Go outside without headphones. Let your mind drag its net across the day's silt until it catches a living thing. The city prefers you exhausted. Rebellion prefers you unhurried. You will also need comrades, not a crowd. Find 2 or 3 who prize becoming over belonging. Make a pact. We will not flatter each other's excuses. We will reward risk, not reputation. We will never weaponize confession. We will care more about each other's future shame than present comfort. Friendship, in this rebellion, is a forge. Expect pushback from the parts of you that learn to survive by pleasing. They will call your experiments selfish or dangerous. Answer them with responsibility, not apology. Rebellion that forgets consequence is just adolescence in leather. You are to build structures that can bear the heat you generate. Budgets, calendars, sleep, honest agreements. Nietzsche admired strength with manners, the kind that doesn't need cruelty to prove itself. Look to history for conspirators across time. Socrates refusing the easy exile of his own questioning. Spinoza grinding lenses to earn bread while crafting a free philosophy. Beethoven composing while deaf, audacity louder than silence. Rosa Parks refusing a seat assignment, not as a burst of mood, but as the ripeness of a long discipline. Notice, their rebellion was precise. It converted private clarity into public fracture points. They did not explode randomly. They pressed on one hinge until the door moved. Finally, alter your relation to failure. The herd worships results. You will worship experiments. Failure under genealogical light is information about your real aims. It reveals the values you enacted rather than recited. When you fail, perform a kind of ritual autopsy. Which value was alive? Which one merely spoke? Adjust your commitments until your calendar and your courage rhyme. Does this sound like a lot? Good. You are trading the convenience of inherited certainty for the muscularity of chosen vision. Every rebellion is a romance with risk. You will lose admirers who loved your earlier, uninterrupted version. You may lose diagnostic labels that offered comforting excuses. You will gain the animal in your chest, no longer pacing. You will give it work. The crosswalk is still humming, but your foot is already in the street. There is one more thing, the hinge upon which all of this turns, a realization so disorienting and liberating that it transforms rebellion from reaction into revelation. It will decide whether you grind yourself into a monument to discipline or open into something stranger, freer, more dangerous and kind, the ultimate truth, the final, most powerful realization. Here it is, the hinge your rebellion turns on, the organ note beneath all the others. Your nature is not a specimen to be measured. It is a promise to be kept. You are not a fixed essence discovering the rules left by a vanished God. You are a living interpretation, composing the rules as you go. Nietzsche knew this about human nature. It is not a noun but a verb, not stability but self-overcoming. You are the creature whose survival depends on what it can make of itself. The paradox lands like a soft thunder. You long for a foundation, and you are the foundation. Not the solitary ego inventing fantasy, but the whole of you, instincts, wounds, courage, memory, organizing chaos into a style. When Nietzsche says God is dead, he is not gloating. He is announcing the evacuation of an external guarantor. The cosmos won't hand you a user manual thick with commandments. That loss can feel like vertigo, but it is also a specific kind of permission. The future is no longer something you comply with. It is something you curate. The truth you can tolerate becomes the life you can build. Does that mean anything goes? No. Perspectivism is not relativism in costume. It is a demand for rank. Not all interpretations are equal. Some shrink you, others enlarge you. Some feed ressentiment, others metabolize pain into power. You do not choose beliefs by their comfort. You choose them by their fertility, by their capacity to generate strength, candor, joy, depth, courage, play. Nietzsche measures interpretations by whether they increase your ability to bear reality and, in bearing it, beautify it. The standard is not purity, the standard is creative intensity. That is the test of your values. Do they make you more capable of facing the whole? Look back at your secret economy. When your kindness is a strategy to avoid conflict, it soils both kindness and conflict. When your humility is a disguise for fear, it kills both humility and ambition. The ultimate truth is bracing because it refuses alibis. Every posture must answer the question, what can you do because of this? The will to power, properly understood, doesn't reduce life to domination. It expands life into authorship. You interpret the world not to control it like a tyrant, but to compose it like a symphony in which your limitations become instruments. This is where the thought experiment of eternal recurrence ceases to be philosophy homework and becomes a spinal decision. Imagine your life, every gesture and omission, unfolding again and again, unaltered, across an infinite return. If you would curse such a fate, your rebellion is still reaction. If you could say yes, even to the thorn parts, the betrayals endured and committed, the nights of doubt, the unfinished attempts, then you have moved from freedom as avoidance to freedom as affirmation. The point is not that the cosmos repeats. The point is that the question exposes whether your days are a draft you regret or a design you consent to. Amor fati isn't passive acceptance. It's the courage to prefer reality with you in it to any dream in which you disappear. Become who you are, Nietzsche borrows from Pindar, and you finally hear the grammar. Become active, ongoing, imperfect. Who, singular, unrepeatable, not interchangeable with any herd identity. You, this body, this voice, this history, this appetite, this tenderness, this rage, are a present tense fact that needs no apology. Human nature under this light is not purity to be preserved, it is energy to be sculpted. The moral question is not what would a saint do, but what would a creator of values do here with these tools in this hour? Notice how this untangles a dozen knots. You no longer need to amputate your shadow to be good. You need to apprentice it. Your aggression becomes boundary rather than violence. Your ambition becomes offering rather than conquest. Your sensuality becomes color rather than theft. Integration is not a detour around ethics. It is the only path to ethics that doesn't rot into hypocrisy. The highest courtesy you can offer others is to become difficult to manipulate by your fear, by their praise, by the wind of trends. A self-respecting will ceases to treat others as alibis. You start to see why Nietzsche distrusts pity and prefers compassion that strengthens. Pity freezes the other in the pose of victimhood and freezes you in the pose of savior. Compassion, in the harder sense, respects the other's will to power and asks, how can I help you grow teeth without needing to bite me? This isn't cruelty, it's a vote of confidence in another's capacity to become. Applied to yourself, it becomes a rule. Do not solve your suffering by shrinking your life. Solve it by enlarging the context in which it makes sense. If your pain has no task, give it one. The abyss, that famous abyss. You feared it would swallow you. The secret is that you are not staring into emptiness. You are staring into the mirror of possibility. The abyss gazes back because the void is your own unspent potential. If you fight monsters, you risk becoming one. But if you refuse the fight, you risk becoming nothing at all. The cure is not purity, it is style. Take your contradictions and stylize them into a character that can bear them. Moralists seek to remove their thorns. Creators arrange roses around them and name the bouquet. A life with style is not performative, it is honest form, the shape your risks take when they stop apologizing. This realization does not absolve you of duty, it intensifies it. Because no external tribunal will certify your values, you must craft institutions in your own soul, courtrooms where temptations are cross-examined, workshops where ideals are stress-tested, gardens where forgiveness is grown without erasing accountability. Your calendar becomes a constitution. Your friendships become councils. Your solitude becomes a supreme court where your ghost of yesterday must persuade your breathing today. You may ask, but what of truth? Are we to trade it for taste? Nietzsche's charge is subtler. He suggests that truths began as metaphors, worn until their edges dulled, then mistaken for literal maps. He doesn't tell you to discard truth. He tells you to revere it as a tool whose value depends on what it enables you to build. Scientific truth shows us the machinery. Existential truth decides what to do about it. The mature mind holds both without pretending they are the same currency. Your task is to align what is with what can be loved without pretending that either cancels the other. Look again at the city you walk through. It hasn't vanished. It is still ergonomic, still safe, still anesthetic. You do not need to burn it. You need to outgrow it. You navigate it now as a maker, pilfering its materials, ignoring its applause, declining its permissions without declaring war. You are no longer obedient or oppositional by reflex. You are oriented. Your values cease to be reactions to the herd. They become quiet laws you enforce within yourself. The result isn't aloofness, it's a more intimate courage. You begin to meet people at the edge of what they could be instead of the center of what they were taught to defend. There is a ceremony worth performing, not once but often. Stand in front of a mirror, the kind that began this whole inquiry. Let your face assemble from the fog, the mask behind you on hooks, the tools clean, the city visible through the window. Ask out loud, what will I value today that makes me more able to love fate tonight? Then choose one vow you can keep, small, specific, costly. I will tell the inconvenient truth in the meeting. I will write the paragraph no one asked for. I will lift weights heavier than my mood. I will walk without headphones until a new thought arrives. I will apologize without a footnote. I will say no without poison. These are not self-help tips. They are acts of legislation. Each one edits the constitution by which you live. You carry chaos, yes, but it is creative chaos, the unsettledness from which stars are born. Nietzsche's hope for you is neither sanctimony nor cynicism. It is a dance that does not ask permission from gravity, but uses it. Your human nature is to be capable of that dance, to affirm the world so fully you can change it without hating it, to respect suffering so deeply you refuse to waste it, to love strength so cleanly it feels like generosity. You are not the animal that must be saved from itself. You are the animal that must invent itself, and again, until even the abyss feels like a floor you can leap from. Open the door. Morning is a rehearsal, afternoon is a performance, evening is an honest review. If you can say yes to the day in its entirety, not because it spared you, but because you spent yourself, then the mirror will not judge you. It will knit then, as if to say, this is what was known and what is being proved. That human nature at its bravest is the courage to turn life into art and to keep creating until the light goes out, grateful even for the dark.